Nora, with calculated cruelty, dresses her paralyzed mother-in-law as a maid and forces her to serve as a living table for her wealthy friends, subjecting her to the most abject humiliation. But the Sheik, who had installed cameras, is on his way to exact a ruthless revenge. The hum of the party filled the sumptuous hall, an echo of laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. Nora, impeccably dressed in a long midnight blue silk gown, mingled among her friends, a calculated smile gracing her lips. "More champagne, darlings?" she asked, gesturing towards the coffee table where trays of canapes and bubbling flutes rested. The table was Fatima, the paralyzed mother-in-law, immobilized in her wheelchair. The maid's apron, with an exaggerated bow, seemed to mock her dignity, and the silver tray, carefully balanced on her lap, and the arms of her chair transformed her into a human piece of furniture. Her eyes, once full of life, now carried a heavy burden of humiliation and despair. She watched Nora with a mix of hatred and resignation, while Nora, with a cruel glint in her eye, leaned in to whisper, "Don't spill anything, a little maid. My friends have high standards." Fatima felt the flush of shame rise to her face, but she could do nothing but endure. Each loud laugh, each casual comment about the delicious snacks she served was a stab to her soul. She dreamed of freedom, of an end to that torment, but hope seemed a luxury she couldn't afford. Far away, in the oppressive silence of his private office, Sheikh Karim had just landed. His early arrival, a whim of fate or suspicion, had led him directly to the security monitor. The screens, once a mere technical detail, were now a portal to a distorted reality. He had installed the cameras due to a vague premonition, a feeling that something was wrong in his mother's absence, but nothing had prepared him for what his eyes now saw. The image of the party, vibrant and colorful, froze the air in his lungs. He saw Nora, his wife, the woman he swore to love and respect, laughing with her friends, and then the camera focused. Fatima, his mother, dressed in a ridiculous apron, her eyes empty, the silver tray on her lap. A living table. Karim's blood ran cold in his veins. His face, previously relaxed from the journey, hardened into a mask of icy fury. His fingers clenched into fists, his fingernails digging into his palm. There were no shouts, just a deadly silence that filled the office. The betrayal, the cruelty, the abjectness of the scene unfolded before him, each of Nora's laughs resounding like a hammer in his head. The image of his mother, the woman who raised him with love and sacrifice, reduced to that condition, was unbearable. With a cold, calculated determination, Karim stood up. His steps were silent, but they carried the weight of an impending storm. He walked through the opulent corridors, the sound of the party growing with each step. The music and cheerful voices ceased abruptly when he appeared at the entrance of the hall. Nora, in the middle of a witty anecdote, saw her husband. Her smile wavered, transforming into an expression of surprise, then confusion, and finally an icy terror as she saw the deadly intensity in his eyes. He didn't look at her, nor at her shocked friends. His eyes were fixed on Fatima. Karim walked slowly to his mother. The silence was so dense you could hear your own heart beating. Without a word, without a single sound, he reached out and, with a firm and deliberate movement, ripped the maid's apron off Fatima's body. The fabric fell to the floor like a dirty rag, revealing the simple dress she wore underneath. Fatima's eyes, previously empty, widened in shock, then in painful understanding, and finally, a glimmer of long-forgotten hope. She looked at her son, then at Nora, who was now visibly trembling. Karim turned to Nora, his eyes dark as the deepest night, devoid of any warmth. "Nora," his voice was a dangerous whisper, "serve my mother." Nora's world crumbled. Terror consumed her. She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. The Sheik was not asking her. He was ordering. With a look that promised hell, he gestured to the tray of canapés she had placed on Fatima. Trembling, her hands cold and sweaty, Nora picked up a champagne glass and a canapé. Her eyes met Fatima's, who now watched her with an expression that mixed vindication with deep sadness. The humiliation Nora had inflicted was now hers. The terror in Nora's eyes was palpable, the realization that she had been discovered, and the price would be unimaginable. Nora, her hands trembling uncontrollably, extended the champagne glass and canapé to Fatima. Her fingers brushed her mother-in-law's, an icy touch that sent a shiver of dread down Nora's spine. The glass clinked dangerously, almost spilling the golden liquid onto Fatima's simple dress. Every movement was a monumental effort. Every millimeter of distance between her hand and Fatima's seemed an eternity. She felt the gaze of her friends, once complicit in her cruelty, now fixed on her with a mix of shock, embarrassment, and a hint of ill-concealed satisfaction. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint clinking of crystal and Nora's own ragged breath. Fatima, with a newfound dignity that seemed forged in the fire of humiliation, accepted the glass and the canapé. Her eyes, once tearful and empty, now shone with a cold, penetrating light, fixed on Nora's. There was no exultant triumph, no cruel joy, but a stillness that spoke volumes, the stillness of justice, of truth coming to light, and of a deep pain finally finding relief. It was the gaze of one who had endured the unbearable and now saw the tormentor in her own hell. Nora's friends, once so animated and involved in the charade, began to disperse with almost indecent haste. Hasty whispers about urgent engagements and unexpected contingencies filled the air as they headed for the exit, avoiding any visual contact with Karim or Nora. The festive atmosphere dissolved in seconds, like a house of cards. In a few minutes, the sumptuous hall, once filled with laughter and chatter, emptied completely, leaving only the three protagonists of that silent drama. The music stopped, the light seemed to dim, and the echo of a party that should never have happened hung in the air. Nora felt cold sweat trickle down her back, dampening the expensive fabric of her dress. The public humiliation was a blow, but Karim's icy gaze promised something far worse. She had served Fatima once, but Karim's order seemed endless. He hadn't said just once. What would come next? Now, Karim's voice cut through the air like an ice blade, more dangerous for its controlled calm. Serve her again, and make sure she has everything she needs. Don't stop until my mother says it's enough. Nora swallowed hard, feeling her throat dry and scratchy. She picked up another glass, another canapé, her hands trembling so much that the champagne threatened to overflow. Her movements were robotic, each gesture a torture, each second an eternity. She offered it to Fatima, who, with an almost imperceptible nod, refused. "She doesn't want any more, Karim," Nora whispered, her voice choked, almost inaudible. "I don't care what she wants," Karim growled, stepping forward, his dominating presence filling the space. "I care about what she deserves and what you owe her. Serve her until she says it's enough, and do it with the dignity you denied her." The humiliation was excruciating, a slow poison that corroded her soul. Nora, the proud hostess, the woman who reveled in her position and power, was now figuratively kneeling, serving the one she had reduced to an object. Fatima watched the scene, a solitary tear tracing a path down her marked face, but it was a tear of relief and an ancient pain beginning to heal, not of sadness. She saw the terror in Nora's eyes, the mask of superiority shattered, revealing a frightened and vulnerable woman, and felt a pang of bitter satisfaction. Karim knelt beside his mother, completely ignoring Nora for a moment. He took Fatima's hand, squeezing it gently, a gesture of love and protection that contrasted brutally with the coldness he dedicated to his wife. "Mother?" His voice was soft, a balm. "Are you well? Do you need anything?" Fatima merely nodded, unable to speak, but her eyes conveyed infinite gratitude, a renewed faith in her son. He stood up, his expression hardening again as he turned to Nora. "Take my mother to her room," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous but charged with unquestionable authority. "Help her prepare for rest. Make sure she is comfortable. Then, wait for me in the office. Don't be late." Nora felt a shiver run through her body, colder than any winter wind. The office, the place where he had seen everything, the place where the truth had been revealed in pixels and light. She knew that what awaited her there would be far worse than any public humiliation. It was the beginning of her private hell, and there was no escape. With immense effort, every muscle protesting, Nora approached Fatima's wheelchair. She avoided her mother-in-law's gaze, unable to face her, shame burning on her face. Pushing the wheelchair, which had once been a tool of her oppression, now became a symbol of her own downfall, a heavy burden she was forced to carry. Every turn of the wheels was a reminder of what she had done and what was to come. The Sheik watched, his eyes like embers, ensuring that every order was fulfilled, that every step was taken. The silence of the mansion was broken only by the soft creak of the chair's wheels, a sound that echoed the end of an era and the beginning of another, darker and more uncertain for Nora. With each turn of the corridor, each door they passed, Nora felt the weight of Karim's gaze on her back, an invisible yet crushing pressure. She pushed the chair with a stiffness that barely concealed the tremor in her arms. Fatima, sitting upright, said not a word. Her eyes, once filled with resigned sadness, now carried a depth Nora couldn't decipher. Perhaps relief, perhaps an even greater pain at seeing the extent of her daughter-in-law's cruelty, or perhaps just the stillness of one who had waited for a long time. They reached Fatima's room, a luxurious space, but one Nora had transformed into a private prison. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing the imposing bed, the heavy curtains. Karim remained at the entrance, arms crossed, observing every movement. "Help her prepare for rest," Karim's voice repeated, this time with a tone that brooked no failure. "Make sure she is comfortable." Nora nodded. Her head bowed. She approached the wheelchair, hesitating for a moment. How could she, the woman who had forced Fatima into such abject humiliation, now touch her under the pretense of care? The irony was a bitter poison in her mouth. With her hands still trembling, she unlocked the wheels and positioned herself to help Fatima stand. "Do you need help getting up, Mother?" Nora asked. Her voice almost inaudible, an empty formality. Fatima merely shook her head negatively, her eyes fixed on Nora's for a brief instant, a gaze that seemed to see through her soul. With a visible effort and Nora's help, Fatima managed to support herself on the bed. The forced proximity was excruciating for Nora. She could smell Fatima's soft perfume, feel the texture of the simple dress she had ignored for so long. Nora undid Fatima's bun, her fingers brushing the soft graying hair. Each touch was a reminder of the intimacy she had desecrated. She helped Fatima take off her dress, replacing it with a silk nightgown. Each piece of clothing Nora helped remove also stripped away a layer of her own dignity and pride. Fatima remained silent, a statue of patience, allowing Nora to move and dress her as if she were a doll. But her eyes, always fixed, were a mirror to Nora's conscience. Finally, Fatima was lying in bed, the silk sheets covering her. Nora adjusted the pillows, trying to appear attentive, but her movements were mechanical, devoid of any warmth. She felt Karim's gaze still at the door, and knew she could not fail in any detail. She picked up a glass of water from the bedside table and offered it to Fatima. "Water, Mother?" Fatima accepted, drinking slowly, her eyes never leaving Nora. When she finished, Nora took the glass and put it back. "Are you comfortable, Mother?" Nora asked, her voice a whisper. Fatima closed her eyes for a moment, an almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips. She opened her eyes again and nodded, a small gesture, but one that released Nora from that momentary torture. "Good," Karim said, his voice cutting the silence of the room. "Now, wait for me in the office. Don't be late." The office. She left Fatima's room, avoiding Karim's gaze, and began the long walk to the office. The mansion's corridors, once filled with life and laughter, were now a dark tunnel, each of Nora's steps echoing the sound of her own condemnation. The luxury around her, the Persian carpets, the works of art, the antique furniture, seemed to mock her, reminding her of the life she was about to lose. She reached the massive door of Karim's office. It was ajar. She pushed it gently and entered. The ambience was imposing, dominated by a large mahogany desk and bookshelves filled with books. In the center of the desk, a monitor still displayed the frozen image of the party, the tray of canapes on Fatima's lap, the ridiculous apron. Nora felt her stomach churn. She turned away, unable to look at the proof of her cruelty. There were no chairs for guests, only a leather armchair behind the desk. Nora remained standing in the center of the room, feeling small and exposed. The air was heavy, charged with an electric tension. She could hear her own heartbeats hammering in her ears. Every second that passed was an eternity of dread. Then she heard footsteps, firm, deliberate, approaching the door. The sound was that of a judge walking to deliver a sentence. The door opened completely, and Karim entered, his eyes, still dark and icy, fixed on Nora. He said not a word. He just walked to his desk, sat in the armchair, and stared at her. The image on the screen behind him, a silent testimony. The judgment had begun. The silence of the office was torture. Karim stared at her, his dark eyes piercing Nora's soul. She felt naked, exposed. The monitor behind him, with the frozen image of the party, the tray of canapes on Fatima's lap, the maid's apron, the forced smiles of her friends, was a silent and irrefutable accusation. "Karim!" Nora's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. I can explain." Karim raised an eyebrow. "Explain?" His voice, a thread of ice, sharp and emotionless. "What is there to explain, Nora? The images are quite clear, don't you think?" He gestured to the monitor. Nora felt a chill. His calm was more terrifying than any anger. It was the calm of a predator. "It's not what it looks like," Nora tried, her voice trembling. "Fatima. She was feeling lonely. I just wanted her to participate. My friends. They adore Fatima. And I thought it would be fun, a joke." The words sounded hollow, pathetic. She knew he had seen everything. A cold, bitter smile played on Karim's lips. "A joke, Nora. Dressing my mother, a paralyzed woman, in a maid's apron and using her as a living table for your wealthy friends? You call that a joke?" He leaned in. "You humiliated her, dehumanized her, treated her as an object, a futile prop. Shame and fear suffocated her." "I'm so sorry," she murmured, tears welling up. "I swear I didn't think. I didn't mean to." "Didn't think?" Karim interrupted her, his voice low but intense. "Didn't you think about the cameras I installed? Didn't you think I cared about my mother's well-being? Or were you so consumed by your vanity and cruelty that you believed you could do whatever you wanted with impunity?" Nora swallowed hard. The cameras. She had forgotten. In her arrogance, she never believed he would use them, or that he would return so soon. I didn't know about the cameras," she confessed, a lament. "I would never have done that if I had known. Karim let out a humorless laugh. "Ah, so the problem isn't your cruelty, but your lack of cunning, I see." He leaned back. "Do you think I believe a word? That I didn't see the pleasure in your eyes as my mother was humiliated? I saw everything. Every smile, every look of contempt." Karim's words were like knives. Nora felt her face burn. She couldn't deny the perverse pleasure in her power over Fatima. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible, dread consuming her. Karim watched her. "What am I going to do?" he repeated. "The answer will be proportional to your depravity. You will have plenty of time to reflect." He stood up, walked to the window, his back to her. Nora felt a chill down her spine. He wasn't finished. "You are no longer my wife, Nora," he said without turning around. "You are a disgrace to this family, a stain on my name, and as such, you will be treated." Nora staggered. Divorce, the end of her life of luxury, status, power, but "will be treated" suggested something far darker than material loss. Karim turned around. "But before anything else," he continued, his voice controlled, "you will learn the meaning of dignity and of service, not for me, not for your friends, for my mother." He walked to the desk, turned off the monitor. The room plunged into symbolic darkness. "Go to your room, Nora. Pack a small bag with essentials. Don't try anything stupid. Every corner of this house has eyes and ears." Nora couldn't breathe. A small bag. What was he planning? Terror paralyzed her. She knew that the hell that awaited her would be far more elaborate. She was at his mercy, and he would show no mercy. "Now," Karim said, his voice cutting through the air like a whip, "get out." Nora, her legs trembling, turned and left the office, leaving behind the man who had unmasked her and the beginning of her punishment. The silence of the mansion now seemed like a scream, and her every step was an echo of her impending downfall. Nora left the office like a ghost, her legs barely supporting her. The heavy air of the mansion, once a symbol of her power and status, now seemed to suffocate her. Each step echoed in her mind Karim's icy words, "You are no longer my wife, Nora." The phrase hammered in her ears, a final verdict, divorce, the end of everything. But what terrified her even more was the veiled promise of a punishment that went beyond material loss. "You are a disgrace to this family, a stain on my name." What did "will be treated" mean? Nora's imagination, once so fertile in planning humiliations for Fatima, now turned against her, painting dark and terrifying scenarios. She felt a chill that didn't come from cold, but from pure dread. She walked through the sumptuous corridors, the soft Persian carpets beneath her feet, the works of art on the walls, the crystal vases gleaming, all of it, which once represented her conquest, now seemed to mock her, a cruel reminder of the paradise she had desecrated and was about to lose. The mansion, once her kingdom, had transformed into her private prison, and Karim, her husband, into her executioner. She reached her room, the massive oak door feeling heavier than ever. She opened it and entered. The ambience was a sanctuary of luxury, the king-size canopy bed, the silk curtains that filtered the moonlight, the closet filled with designer clothes and sparkling jewels. All of it was hers, or at least it had been. Now she had to choose the essentials for a small bag. The irony was brutal. Nora walked to the closet, her hands trembling. What was essential when her entire life was crumbling? She looked at the expensive dresses, the designer bags, the high heels. None of them seemed to have any value now. They were just remnants of a life she had destroyed with her own cruelty. With a trembling sigh, she picked up a small leather travel bag she rarely used. She opened it on the bed. Her eyes scanned the shelves. Clothes. She would need clothes, but not the party dresses she used to impress her friends, the same ones who had witnessed Fatima's humiliation. She picked out some simpler pieces, linen pants, a few cotton blouses, a light jacket. Each item she folded and placed in the bag seemed like a farewell to a part of her identity. Jewelry. She hesitated. The diamond necklace Karim had given her for her birthday. The emerald earrings. She touched them, feeling the cold of the metal and stones. They were symbols of her power and Karim's affection. Now they were mere weights. She left them. She wasn't sure if she would take them wherever Karim was sending her. Toiletries. She grabbed the basics: toothbrush, toothpaste, a bar of soap, a small bottle of her favorite perfume, a luxury she might no longer enjoy. As she packed, her eyes fixed on the security camera discreetly installed in the upper corner of the wall. Karim had said, "Every corner of this house has eyes and ears." The warning echoed in her mind, crushing any thought of resistance or escape. She was being watched. Every movement, every expression of dread was being recorded. The bag was ready, small, containing only the bare minimum. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the room, a tangible symbol of her downfall. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, her body heavy, her heart beating erratically. The silence of the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breath. She didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes, hours. Every second was an eternity of uncertainty. What would he do? Would he send her away? Where? To a place where she would have nothing, where she would be just a woman without a name, without status, without the protection of a sheik. Or would it be something worse? The idea of a more elaborate, crueler punishment made her tremble. Then a sound, not a knock on the door, but footsteps, firm, approaching the corridor. Nora held her breath, her body tense. The footsteps stopped in front of her door, a momentary silence, and then the doorknob turned. The door opened slowly, revealing the imposing figure of Karim. His eyes, still cold and impenetrable, swept the room, stopping at the small bag on the bed and finally at Nora. He said not a word, just extended his hand, a gesture that brooked no refusal. It was time. Hell was about to begin, and she was completely at the mercy of the man she had betrayed and humiliated. She stood up, picked up the bag, and walked towards him, feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. Karim's gaze was the last thing she saw before leaving the room, leaving behind the life she had destroyed. Nora, with the small bag in her hand, followed Karim out of the room. The corridor, once a stage for her triumphant entrances, now seemed like a dark, endless tunnel. Karim's every step was firm, determined, while hers were hesitant, as if her legs might give way at any moment. The silence of the mansion was oppressive, broken only by the distant echo of her own accelerated heartbeats. She felt the invisible eyes of the cameras in every corner, the constant surveillance Karim had mentioned, and this prevented any foolish thought of escape or resistance. They descended the grand staircase, the cold marble steps beneath her feet. Nora avoided looking at the ancestral portraits on the walls, the serious faces that seemed to judge her. Her fate was uncertain, but the certainty that it would be terrible weighed on her like a shroud. Karim said not a word. His presence was a wall of ice, and Nora dared not break the silence. They stopped in front of the door to what Nora recognized as Fatima's private sitting room, a more welcoming and less formal space than the main halls, where her mother-in-law used to spend her afternoons. Karim opened the door without knocking, revealing the interior. Fatima was there, sitting in her wheelchair, facing the window that overlooked the night garden. She still wore the maid's apron, the white fabric contrasting cruelly with the silk of her dress. The tray of canapés, now empty, rested on a small table beside her. Her eyes, once filled with painful resignation, were fixed on the garden, but Nora felt that she was aware of their presence. Karim entered first, Nora close behind, feeling the air thin. He walked to Fatima, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the frail woman. Without a word, With a delicacy that contrasted with his contained fury, he leaned down and untied Fatima's apron. The white fabric slipped gently away, revealing the silk dress completely. Karim picked up the apron and folded it carefully, placing it on the empty tray. Fatima, who until then seemed oblivious, slowly turned her head. Her eyes met Nora's. There was no surprise, just a cold understanding and a hint of something more, a silent satisfaction that made Nora's blood run cold. Her mother-in-law had realized. She knew Nora had been discovered. Karim turned to Nora, his icy eyes like a predator's. His voice was a whisper, but charged with unshakable authority. "Nora," he began, and the sound of her name on his lips was poison. "You humiliated my mother. You dehumanized her. Now you will learn what it means to serve, not for fun, not out of cruelty, but out of dignity." He gestured to Fatima. "My mother is tired. She has had a long and humiliating day thanks to you. She needs a warm tea and a blanket. And you, Nora, will be the one to provide it." Nora's stomach churned. Serving Fatima, the woman she had turned into a prop. The irony was a brutal blow. She looked at Fatima, who watched her with an intensity that seemed to pierce her soul. The terror in Nora's eyes was palpable, and Fatima absorbed it, every drop, with disturbing calm. "Go to the kitchen," Karim ordered, his voice a little louder but still controlled. "Prepare my mother's favorite tea, and bring the cashmere blanket from the corridor closet. Do it now!" Nora felt her legs tremble. The kitchen, the domain of the servants. She, Nora, the lady of the house, the hostess of parties, would now be the servant. The humiliation was excruciating. But Karim's gaze left no room for disobedience. With her head bowed, feeling the weight of Fatima's gaze on her back, Nora turned and left the room, leaving the small bag on the floor. Each step towards the kitchen was a step in her own downfall, an echo of her new and terrible reality. She could feel Fatima's invisible smile, the silent victory her mother-in-law savored. Hell had begun, and Nora was only in the first circle. Nora, with the small bag on the floor of Fatima's private sitting room, felt the weight of Karim's command. The mansion, once the stage of her social ascent, now transformed into a labyrinth of humiliation. She could feel Fatima's invisible smile, the silent victory her mother-in-law savored, piercing her back like 1,000 needles. She walked down the corridor, her feet sinking into the Persian carpets she once trod with arrogance. The silence was oppressive, but in her mind, the echo of her friends' laughter and the toasts from the parties she hosted seemed to mock her. The kitchen. That was the domain of the servants, a place she rarely visited, except to give orders or inspect. Now, she was the intruder, the servant. As she entered, the smell of spices and cleanliness hit her. The marble countertops gleamed under the soft light. The hanging copper utensils shone. Everything was impeccable, organized, but strange to her. Where was Fatima's favorite tea? She had never bothered to know. There had always been someone else to do it. Her eyes scanned the cabinets, the pantry. A wave of panic washed over her. How would she make something so simple? With trembling hands, Nora opened one cabinet after another, searching. She found a variety of teas, in elegant boxes, but which one was the favorite? She felt ridiculous, incompetent. The woman who commanded a team of servants was now lost in her own kitchen. Finally, she spotted a box of mint tea, with an Arabic label that Fatima used to mention. It was a guess, but it was the best she had. She picked up a kettle, filled it with water, and placed it on the stove. The sound of the boiling water seemed amplified in the kitchen silence. While she waited, her mind wandered. She remembered Fatima, sitting in her wheelchair with the white apron, her eyes empty as Nora's friends laughed and rested their plates on her back. The image was vivid, and remorse, an emotion she rarely felt, began to gnaw at her insides. Not genuine remorse for Fatima's pain, but selfish remorse for the consequence of her actions. The water boiled. Nora prepared the tea, pouring the infusion into a delicate porcelain cup. Steam rose, hot and aromatic. Then, the second part of the task, the cashmere blanket. She remembered Karim mentioning the corridor closet. Leaving the tea on the counter, Nora left the kitchen and walked down the main corridor, a place she had traversed countless times with her head held high. Now she felt small, vulnerable. She opened the linen closet, where blankets and towels were perfectly folded. She found the cashmere blanket, soft and luxurious, the same one Fatima used on her quiet afternoons before Nora turned her life into hell. She picked it up, feeling the soft texture in her hands, a cruel reminder of the comfort she had denied her mother-in-law. With the blanket folded over her arm and the steaming cup of tea in her other hand, Nora returned to Fatima's room. Each step was torture. The door was open, and she could see Karim standing motionless, observing Fatima. Her mother-in-law was still facing the window, but Nora knew her eyes were fixed on the door, waiting. Nora entered, the smell of tea filling the air. Karim didn't move. His icy eyes met hers, a silent warning for her to complete the task flawlessly. She walked to Fatima, feeling her mother-in-law's heavy gaze upon her. "Your tea, madam," Nora murmured, her voice almost inaudible, a strange mix of servitude and humiliation. She extended the cup. Fatima slowly turned her head, her eyes meeting Nora's. There was no anger, no explicit triumph, just a calm observation. She took the cup, her thin, aged fingers brushing Nora's. That touch, once insignificant, now carried the weight of a complete inversion of power. "And the blanket," Nora continued, unfolding the cashmere. With a hesitant movement, she placed it over Fatima's legs, covering her carefully. Her fingers brushed the fabric of Fatima's silk dress, the same one she had covered with a maid's apron. Fatima took a sip of the tea, her eyes still fixed on Nora. A slight smile, almost imperceptible, curved her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of deep, silent satisfaction. Revenge, she seemed to say, was a dish best served cold, and Nora was serving it. Karim, who had been observing the scene in silence, finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Now, Nora, you will sit there." He indicated a small corner armchair away from Fatima. "And you will observe. You will watch my mother enjoy her tea, her comfort, and you will think of every moment you deprived her of it." Nora felt a shiver to sit and observe, to be forced to witness Fatima's tranquility, knowing that she was the one who had caused so much suffering. It was psychological torture, a punishment that went beyond physical pain. With her head bowed, she walked to the armchair and sat down, feeling small and insignificant. Fatima drank her tea, the cashmere blanket on her legs, her eyes fixed on the night garden. But her mind, Nora knew, was savoring every moment of her daughter-in-law's downfall. Nora's hell was just beginning, and the audience consisted of those she had hurt the most. Nora sank into the corner armchair, feeling the soft upholstery beneath her hands, but unable to find any comfort. The room, once a refuge of tranquility for Fatima, was now a torture chamber for her. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest against the humiliation, but Karim's icy gaze kept her immobile, trapped in her place. Her eyes, reluctant, were drawn to Fatima. Her mother-in-law sat there, in her wheelchair, wrapped in the luxurious cashmere blanket Nora had placed, sipping her tea with an almost ethereal calm. The porcelain cup rested on her thin lips, and the warm steam rose gently, a stark contrast to the fire burning in Nora's chest. Fatima didn't look at her directly, but Nora felt the presence of that invisible gaze, the awareness that every sip, every moment of peace enjoyed, was a silent punishment for her. Nora's mind was a whirlwind of images and sounds. She saw Fatima, again, dressed in the white apron, her eyes empty as her friends' laughter echoed through the hall. She heard the toasts, the compliments on her creativity, the frivolous conversations while her mother-in-law was used as an inanimate object. Remorse, once a selfish seed, now began to sprout with a more bitter intensity. It wasn't compassion for Fatima's pain, but the terror of seeing herself in that place, stripped of dignity, at the mercy of someone she had hurt so deeply. Karim remained standing, like a marble statue, observing the scene with an intensity that seemed to suck all the air from the room. His eyes, once full of love and admiration for Nora, were now wells of disillusionment and contained fury. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was a sentence, a constant reminder of the gravity of her actions. The silence was broken only by the faint clinking of Fatima's cup and the distant sound of the wind outside. Nora felt cold sweat trickle down her back. Her life, her status, her image, everything was crumbling under the weight of that silence. She, who had always controlled everything, was now the controlled, the observed, the judged. The irony was a slow poison, corroding her soul. Fatima finished her tea, placing the empty cup on the small table beside her. Her eyes finally turned to Nora, and this time there was not only understanding, but a subtle glint of triumph. It wasn't a noisy or cruel triumph, but the quiet satisfaction of one who sees justice served. She said not a word, but her eyes spoke volumes, conveying a clear message. You reap what you sow. Nora felt a shiver run down her spine. That gaze was more potent than any scream, any reprimand. It was the confirmation that her downfall was complete, and that Fatima, the woman she had tried to erase, was now in command. Karim stepped forward, his voice low but sharp as a blade. You will spend the night here, Nora, he said without diverting his gaze from his mother, in this room. You will sleep in this armchair, and tomorrow morning you will prepare my mother's breakfast and serve it, and then you will help her get dressed and take her to the garden and do everything she needs, without anyone's help. You are her only servant now. Karim's words fell upon Nora like stones. Spend the night there, sleep in the armchair, serve Fatima in all her needs, without the help of servants? The reality of her new existence hit her with full force. She, the lady of the house, the Sheik's wife, would be the personal maid of her paralyzed mother-in-law. The terror in Nora's eyes deepened. She looked at Karim, searching for a sign of clemency, a trace of the man who loved her. But there was nothing, only cold, relentless determination. He turned to Fatima, and his expression softened slightly. Rest, mother. Tomorrow will be a new day. Fatima nodded, a small smile curving her lips. She closed her eyes, seeming to finally relax in the comfort of the blanket and tea. Nora, however, felt despair swell within her. The night had barely begun, and the promise of a new day was only the promise of more humiliation. Hell, she realized, had many circles, and she was about to explore each of them. The audience now was just Fatima and Karim, but the stage was her own life, and the drama was just beginning. Night fell heavily upon the room, transforming it into a silent prison for Nora. The corner armchair, once a mere detail of the decor, was now her bed of torment. The soft upholstery seemed to harden with each passing minute, and the pre-dawn chill, seeping through the windows, penetrated her bones. She tried to find a comfortable position, but it was useless. Every movement was a reminder of her new reality, of the humiliation that enveloped her like an icy cloak. Her eyes, heavy with exhaustion and despair, fixed on Fatima. Her mother-in-law slept serenely in her wheelchair, the cashmere blanket cozy over her legs, her breathing soft and regular. The image was a brutal contrast to the hell Nora was living. Fatima, the woman she had dehumanized, now enjoyed a peaceful sleep, while Nora, the tormentor, writhed in agony. There were no tears, just a bitter dryness in her throat and an icy emptiness in her chest. Sleep would not come. Nora's mind was a battlefield, the laughter of her friends, the toasts, the looks of admiration she had received for her creativity, all of it now transformed into distorted echoes, mocking her in the silence of the night. She saw herself again, haughty, commanding, while Fatima, in the white apron, was just an object. The irony was cruel. She had stripped Fatima of her dignity, and now she was the one being stripped. The fear of Karim, the contained fury in his eyes, was an overwhelming weight. He no longer loved her. That thought was a blow more painful than any physical punishment. The hours dragged on, slow and endless. Nora felt every muscle ache, every nerve vibrate in protest. She stood up once, trying to stretch her numb legs, but the simple act of standing seemed exhausting. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the window, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. She looked at Fatima, who continued to sleep, and a dark, fleeting thought crossed her mind. But the fear of Karim, the certainty that he was watching her in some way, paralyzed her. There was no escape. Finally, a sliver of grey light began to appear on the horizon, announcing dawn. The distant song of a bird broke the oppressive silence, and Nora felt a shiver run down her spine. The new day had arrived, and with it, the promise of even greater humiliation. Her eyes were red and swollen, her body stiff and aching. She felt dirty, exhausted, but the adrenaline of fear kept her alert. Fatima began to stir, a slight sigh escaping her lips. Her eyes opened slowly, meeting Nora's, who sat in the armchair motionless, like a statue of despair. There was no surprise in Fatima's gaze, only a silent expectation. She said not a word, but the glint in her eyes was a clear command. Nora felt her heart pound. It was time. The first task. She got up from the armchair with difficulty, feeling her legs wobbly and her muscles protesting. Each step towards Fatima was an act of surrender, a silent confession of her defeat. "Good morning, madam," Nora murmured, her voice hoarse and almost inaudible, a stark contrast to the authoritative voice she had always used. It was the first time these words had left her lips in such a context, and the taste of humiliation was bitter. Fatima merely nodded, a subtle movement of her head. Her eyes, however, did not leave Nora's, conveying a clear message. Begin. The silence in the room was deafening, filled only by the sound of Nora's accelerated heart. Hell had become real, and she was its sole inhabitant, condemned to serve the woman she had tried to destroy. The invisible audience of Karim and Fatima's silent presence were her judges, and the spectacle of her downfall was just beginning. Nora dragged herself out of the room, every muscle protesting. The kitchen, a realm she rarely visited, seemed like an unknown labyrinth. The servants, who normally bustled with activity at this hour, were notably absent. Karim had ensured she would be alone. The refrigerator, once stocked by invisible hands, now demanded her attention. She opened the door, looking at the ingredients with a mix of confusion and revulsion. What did Fatima eat for breakfast? She had never bothered to know. With trembling hands, Nora picked up eggs, bread, and some vegetables. The task of preparing a simple meal seemed monumental. She had spent her life giving orders, not executing them. The stove, the toaster, the coffee maker. Each appliance seemed to mock her inexperience. She burned the bread, the eggs were too hard, and the coffee bitter. Frustration bubbled in her chest, but Karim's fear was a more potent brake than any anger. She could not fail. Finally, with a clumsy plate and a steaming cup, Nora returned to the room. Fatima was exactly where she had left her, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting. Her mother-in-law's gaze was a physical weight on Nora, bowing her shoulders. She placed the tray on the small table beside Fatima, the clinking of porcelain echoing in the silence. "Your breakfast, madam," Nora said, her voice still a whisper. Fatima looked at the plate, and a slight smile, almost imperceptible, curved her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of satisfaction. She picked up the coffee cup, tasted it, and made a subtle grimace. "It's a little strong, dear. And the eggs, well, they're not like Aisha's." Aisha was the head cook. The criticism, delivered with an almost indifferent calm, struck Nora like a whip. She wanted to scream, to throw the plate on the floor, but she restrained herself. "I apologize, madam. I will do better next time." Fatima merely nodded, beginning to eat slowly, savoring each bite, each sip, while Nora stood, motionless, watching. Time dragged on. Fatima's every chew was torture for Nora, a reminder of her powerlessness. When Fatima finished, she placed the fork on the plate and looked at Nora. "Now help me get dressed. I want to go to the garden. The sun is beautiful today." Nora's heart sank. Helping Fatima get dressed. The intimacy of the task was repugnant. She had avoided any physical contact with her mother-in-law for months, except to push her wheelchair reluctantly. Now she would have to touch her, dress her, like a nurse, like a servant. Nora went to Fatima's wardrobe, which was filled with silks and cashmeres. She chose a simple but elegant dress and returned to her mother-in-law. With trembling hands, she began to unbutton Fatima's pajamas. Her mother-in-law's wrinkled skin, the prominent veins, the fragility of her body, all of it was a vivid reminder of the woman she had dehumanized. Fatima remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Nora's, observing every movement, every hesitation. There was no shame in her gaze, only a calm acceptance of her new position of power. "Careful, Nora," Fatima said softly when Nora pulled the fabric a little too roughly. Nora felt her face burn with shame and anger. She continued, struggling with the buttons, with the weight of the dress. Finally, Fatima was dressed. Nora helped her put on her soft shoes and, with a sigh she tried to hide, picked up the cashmere blanket and placed it over her mother-in-law's legs. "Now to the garden," Fatima commanded, a glint of anticipation in her eyes. Nora positioned herself behind the wheelchair. The weight of Fatima, once insignificant, now seemed crushing. She pushed the chair down the corridor, passing by doors where servants would normally be, but which were now closed, as if the world was holding its breath, watching Nora's private spectacle. The morning sun, which was once a symbol of a new day full of possibilities, was now just a reminder of the hell that awaited her. Every turn of the wheel was a step deeper into her new reality, a reality where she was the servant and Fatima, the queen. The gentle garden breeze, laden with the scent of jasmine and roses, should have been a relief, but for Nora, it was just another reminder of her prison. The morning sun kissed the palm leaves and made the flowers glow in vibrant colors, a scene of peace that brutally contrasted with the storm raging within her. Nora pushed the wheelchair to a shady spot under a bougainvillea-covered pergola where Fatima liked to spend her mornings. "This is good, Nora," Fatima said, her voice soft but with unquestionable authority. She extended her hand, pointing to a small wrought-iron table. "Move me closer to the table, please, and bring me my book, the blue-covered one, that's on the bookshelf in the living room." Nora obeyed, adjusting the wheelchair with visible effort. Her muscles ached and her mind seethed with the injustice of it all. She had planned her life so carefully, built her image as a perfect wife, an impeccable hostess. Now she was a mere shadow, a maid forced to obey. "Yes, madam," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible, before turning and walking back into the house. Each step was a silent but futile resistance. The living room seemed even larger and emptier now that she was alone, without Karim's imposing presence or Fatima's watchful gaze. she found the blue-covered book, a volume of classical poetry, and picked it up with trembling hands. Upon returning to the garden, Fatima had her eyes closed, her face turned to the sun, enjoying the tranquility. Nora hesitated for a moment, observing the serenity of the woman she had so despised. The sight sparked a pang of anger in her chest, but Karim's fear was a more potent break. "Here is your book, madam," Nora said, extending the volume. Fatima opened her eyes slowly, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, dear. Now please, read to me. Start from chapter 3. My eyesight isn't very good today." The request hit Nora like a shock, reading to Fatima. The voice she used to command her servants, to charm her friends, would now be used to entertain the woman she had humiliated. The forced intimacy of the task was excruciating. She sat in the wrought-iron chair in front of Fatima, the heavy book in her hands. "Chapter 3, Nora began, her voice hoarse and hesitant. The words felt strange in her mouth. The rhymes and verses of love and nature sounded like cruel mockery. She stumbled over some words, her mind distant, reliving the scenes from the previous night. The laughter, the toasts, the image of Fatima as an object. "Louder, Nora," Fatima interrupted softly without opening her eyes, and with more emotion. "It's poetry, not a shopping list." She took a deep breath, trying to control the anger bubbling in her chest. She continued to read, forcing her voice to acquire a more melodious, more expressive tone. Each word was a stab to her own dignity. She looked at Fatima, who was motionless, absorbing every verse, every syllable. There wasn't a shred of remorse in her mother-in-law's gaze, only the silent satisfaction of one who finally received what was due to her. The hours dragged on. The sun climbed in the sky and the heat increased. Nora continued to read, her throat dry, her voice failing. She felt sweat trickle down her back, but she dared not stop. The fear of Karim, the certainty that he was watching, was an invisible force that kept her chained to that chair, to that task. Finally, Fatima sighed. "That's enough for now, dear. My head feels a little heavy. I think I need some fresh water, and perhaps a damp cloth for my forehead." Nora closed the book with a soft thud. "Yes, madam," she said, getting up on numb legs. With each new task, each new command, the reality of her new life solidified. She was the servant, and Fatima, the queen. And the day was just beginning. She turned and walked back into the house, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, knowing that there was no escape from the hell she herself had created. Nora returned to the house, her heavy footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The kitchen, which was once a place of abundance and ease, now seemed like a battlefield where she was the only combatant, and she was losing. She opened the refrigerator, took out a pitcher of ice water and a linen cloth. Her hands trembled so much that the water swayed dangerously in the pitcher. The simple act of wetting the cloth under the tap seemed to require all her concentration. She felt Karim's invisible eyes on her every move, judging every hesitation. With the pitcher and the damp cloth, Nora returned to the garden. Fatima was still under the pergola, her eyes closed, an almost irritating serenity on her face. Nora approached, the clinking of the glass pitcher breaking the stillness. "Here is the water, madam, and the cloth," Nora said, her voice firmer now, a remnant of her former authority struggling to emerge. "Thank you, dear. Please pour some water into the glass for me. And the cloth. You can hold it on my forehead for a moment. My head feels a little heavy." The request was a stab. Nora poured the water, her hand still trembling, and extended the glass to Fatima. Then she took the damp cloth and with her fingertips touched her mother-in-law's wrinkled forehead. Fatima's skin was warm, and the contact, however brief, sent a shiver of repulsion and humiliation through Nora. She forced herself to keep her hand there, feeling Fatima's gaze upon her, a gaze that held no malice, only the calm acceptance of her right. Better now, Fatima murmured, closing her eyes again, enjoying the relief. Now, Nora, I think it's time for lunch. I feel a little hungry. How about a light stew, and perhaps some fresh bread? Stew, fresh bread. She could barely make scrambled eggs. The kitchen was hostile territory, and Fatima's every request was a new mountain to climb. Yes, madam, Nora replied, her voice almost inaudible. She removed her hand from Fatima's forehead and stepped back, the damp cloth still in her hands, a reminder of the forced intimacy. Back in the kitchen, the smell of unfamiliar spices and foods assailed her. She opened the cabinets, looking for ingredients for a stew. The pantry, once a treasure trove of delicacies, now seemed like a labyrinth of mystery. She found some vegetables, a piece of meat, and tried to follow a mental recipe she had never needed to use. The process was disastrous. She cut the vegetables unevenly. The meat burned a little in the pan, and the seasoning. She wasn't sure which ones to use. The smell of something burnt began to fill the kitchen, and the bread she tried to bake came out hard and shapeless. Frustration bubbled in her chest, mixed with the paralyzing fear of failure and the impotent rage of her situation. Finally, with a steaming plate of what looked more like thin soup and a broken piece of bread, Nora returned to the garden. Fatima was sitting, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting. Nora placed the tray on the wrought-iron table. "Your lunch, madam," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and shame. Fatima looked at the plate and a small sigh escaped her lips. She picked up the spoon and tasted the stew. Her face showed no revulsion, but also no pleasure. "It's interesting, Nora. A little different from what Aisha used to make. And the bread, well, it's a bit crispy." The criticism, delivered with the same indifferent calm as before, was a blow. Nora felt tears sting her eyes, but she held them back with an iron will. She wouldn't give Fatima the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I apologize, madam. I will do better next time," Nora murmured, her eyes fixed on the ground. Fatima merely nodded, continuing to eat slowly, savoring each spoonful, each piece of bread, while Nora remained standing, motionless, feeling the afternoon sun burn on her skin and humiliation corrode her soul. Lunch seemed to last an eternity. When Fatima finished, she placed the spoon on the plate and looked at Nora. "Now, Nora, I think I'll take a nap. Please help me back to my room and make sure the curtains are closed and the room is cool." The day was far from over. Nora approached the wheelchair, feeling the weight of Fatima and of her own new reality. Each push of the chair, each gentle command from Fatima was another nail in the coffin of her old life. She was the servant, and Fatima, the queen, and the spectacle of her downfall, orchestrated by Karim, continued, relentless and unending. Nora approached the wheelchair, the shadow of the pergola no longer offering the same relief from the scorching sun. The weight of Fatima, both physical and symbolic, seemed to have increased. She grasped the handles of the chair, feeling the polished wood beneath her fingers, and began to push. Each rotation of the wheels was a reminder of the journey she had begun, a steep descent into an abyss she herself had dug. The path back to the house seemed longer than ever. The garden, once a refuge of beauty and luxury, was now a corridor of humiliation. The silence between them was dense, filled only by the soft creak of the wheels and the pounding of Nora's accelerated heart. She felt sweat trickle down her forehead, not just from the heat, but from the tension that enveloped her. Upon reaching the house door, Nora had to maneuver the chair carefully to get past the threshold. Fatima, with her disturbing calm, offered no help or instruction, merely watched, her eyes fixed on Nora as if she were a machine programmed to obey. Inside the house, the air conditioning offered momentary relief, but the heavy atmosphere persisted. Nora pushed the chair down the main corridor, passing by the living room where, the previous night, Fatima had been the center of her cruel spectacle. The image of the table, the laughter, the apron flickered in her mind, a ghost that would haunt her forever. Finally, they reached Fatima's room. It was a sanctuary of luxury and comfort, with heavy silk curtains and antique furniture. The gentle scent of lavender hung in the air. "You can take me to the bed, Nora," Fatima said, her voice soft but with an authority that brooked no questioning. "And please, close the curtains. I want the room very dark, and make sure the air conditioning is at a pleasant temperature, neither too cold nor too hot." Nora obeyed, pushing the wheelchair carefully to the side of the king-size bed. The task of transferring Fatima from the chair to the bed was always delicate. Nora positioned herself, holding Fatima's arms firmly, feeling the fragility of the bones beneath the thin skin. With considerable effort, she helped Fatima stand and lie down on the bed. Each movement was a reminder of the strength Fatima had lost and the strength Nora was forced to employ. Once Fatima was comfortably lying down, Nora turned to the curtains. She pulled the heavy silk drapes, plunging the room into a welcoming gloom. The muffled sound of the outside world was replaced by almost absolute silence. Then she went to the digital thermostat on the wall, adjusting the temperature with precision, as if Fatima's life depended on it. "Is this good, madam?" Nora asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, as she turned to Fatima. Fatima, her eyes already half closed, nodded slowly. "Perfect, dear. Now please, bring me a glass of water by the bed, and make sure the door is just ajar, not locked." Another request. Nora felt a lump in her throat. She left the room, went to the kitchen to get the water, and returned, placing the glass on the bedside table. As she left, she gently closed the door, the almost inaudible click. She found herself alone in the corridor, the silence of the house now seeming even more oppressive. The day was not over yet, and what would come next? The uncertainty was torture. She knew Karim was watching, every movement, every expression, every failure. The terror of his invisible presence was a constant burden. Nora walked to the living room, feeling the weight of her new reality crush her. She was a prisoner in her own home, a servant of her own cruelty. The mirror on the wall reflected an image she barely recognized, a woman with slumped shoulders, a pale face, and eyes filled with deep fear. The queen had fallen, and the servant had risen, but to a throne of pain and humiliation, and the spectacle, she knew, was far from over. Night was approaching, and with it the promise of more tasks, more commands, another day of her new and terrible existence. Nora sat on the living room sofa, her body heavy, her mind a whirlwind of bitter thoughts. The silence of the house was broken only by the distant ticking of an old clock and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She closed her eyes, wishing it were all a nightmare, but reality asserted itself with relentless cruelty. Every fiber of her being craved a moment of peace, a refuge from the constant surveillance, but she knew there was no escape. Suddenly, Fatima's voice echoed down the corridor, soft yet clear, breaking the oppressive stillness. "Nora, dear, I'm awake now. Could you bring me some mint tea and perhaps some of your homemade cookies if it's not too much trouble?" Homemade cookies. The irony was a sharp knife in her chest. She could barely boil water without a disaster, let alone bake cookies. She stood up, feeling every muscle protest, every joint creak under the weight of her exhaustion. The kitchen, again. That battlefield where her incompetence was exposed at every turn, where every ingredient seemed to mock her ignorance. She boiled the water, her hands still trembling, and found a mint tea bag. The homemade cookies were a cruel joke, a constant reminder of her old life of luxury and idleness. She rummaged through the pantry and found some plain, store-bought cookies, which she would never have touched before, much less offered to anyone. She placed them on a fine porcelain plate, feeling the irony of the situation grow more bitter with each passing moment. Back in Fatima's room, the gloom still reigned, the heavy curtains blocking the last rays of sun. Fatima sat on the bed, propped up on silk pillows, her eyes gleaming in the dim light, an expression of serene expectation on her face. "Here is your tea, madam, and the cookies," Nora said, her voice almost inaudible, a mere whisper of her former arrogance. Fatima took the cup, the scent of mint filling the air, an aroma Nora would now associate with her own downfall. She tasted the tea, a small, satisfied smile on her lips, as if each sip were a victory. Then she picked up one of the cookies. "Ah, Nora, how delightful. Crispy. They're not exactly like Aisha's, but they have their own charm." The veiled criticism, delivered with the same indifferent calm as before, was a slow poison, corroding Nora's last shred of dignity. She felt her face burn with shame. Dinner was another disaster. Nora tried to prepare a chicken and rice dish, but the rice was soggy and the chicken dry, almost inedible. Fatima ate with the same indifferent calm, praising the meal's originality, each word a subtle blow to Nora's soul. After dinner, Fatima asked for help preparing for bed. "Nora, dear, could you help me comb my hair, and perhaps help me put on my nightgown? My arms feel a little weak today." Combing Fatima's hair, touching her skin, helping her undress. It was the ultimate humiliation, the forced intimacy of a servant. She picked up the silver brush from the dressing table, her fingers hesitant, as if the object might burn her. Each stroke of the brush through Fatima's graying hair was an act of submission, a forced surrender. The scent of lavender shampoo, once associated with luxury and comfort, was now the aroma of her prison, the perfume of her disgrace. With immense effort, Nora helped Fatima take off her dress and put on her silk nightgown. Her eyes avoided Fatima's, but she felt her mother-in-law's gaze upon her, a gaze that held no explicit triumph, but a deep and silent satisfaction, an acceptance of her new and deserved place. "Thank you, Nora. You are very helpful," Fatima said, lying down on the bed, a sigh of relief escaping her lips, as if the day had been a mere exercise of her restored authority. "Now, please turn off the light and close the door. Have a good night, dear." Nora turned off the light, darkness swallowing the room, and left, closing the door gently, the almost inaudible click echoing in her mind. The corridor was dark and silent, a tunnel to her own solitude. She walked to the living room, feeling the weight of the day, the weight of her new life, crush her. She sat on the sofa, exhausted, her eyes fixed on the void, with no tears to shed, just a dull, constant ache. The mirror on the wall still reflected her image, but now she saw a woman completely different from the one who had mocked Fatima. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale and marked by exhaustion and fear. Her eyes, once filled with arrogance and contempt, now carried a deep sadness and a bitter resignation. Karim. He was somewhere, watching. Every step, every failure, every unshed tear. He had orchestrated everything with calculating coldness, turning her life into a private hell. His revenge was complete, and hers eternal. Nora knew there was no escape. The house, once her palace, was now her prison. Fatima, the deposed queen, had returned to her throne, and Nora was the servant, condemned to serve, to obey, to live under the constant and invisible gaze of her husband. Night advanced, and with it the promise of a new day of humiliation. The spectacle had ended for the outside world, but for Nora, it had only just begun. She was the protagonist of her own tragedy, and the curtain would never rise again. The silence of the house was her sentence, and the echo of Fatima's commands, the soundtrack to her downfall,